Word. I don't know if you guys do. I really get excited about it because I love it. So last week we talked a little bit about worship. Worship is the feeling or expression of reverence and adoration for God. What does adoration mean? Yeah. Huh? To adore. Okay. Go a little further than that. All right, you guys are going to make me do it, ain't you? When you are infatuated with this girl that's walking down the hallway, I am going there. You don't just look at her. You look at her, right? You adore her as she's walking by, to the point where it becomes creepy and she kind of looks off the side of her eyes that you like, dang, that boy is really staring at me. For real, right? And so that is adoring someone when your gaze cannot leave what you're looking at because it's so beautiful and it's so powerful and it's so awesome. Do you adore him and his presence to the degree that your focus stays fixed on him and nothing else? It's good, huh? It's all right, you can talk to me. Was it good? Oof, so good. So, anyway, does your eyes stay focused and connected to him? Or are you too busy watching all the other players walking down the hallway? Right? So, adoration means I adore him. I adore his presence to such a degree that nothing else captivates me but him. That's worship. Adoration is worship. When I'm so in love with him, nothing else matters. People say, man, you can be so in love with him that you become no earthly good. No, I can become so in love with him that it demands the earth to respond to what I carry. Right. Woo! That's good. That go over your head? That was powerful. When I carry him and when I adore him and when I am infatuated with him, it demands a response from the earth when I walk into the room because of who I carry with me. Because adoration always attracts his presence to come and abide. It's good. It's awesome. Last week was fun because we talked about the woman at the well. It's actually one of my favorite stories. And here this woman comes and she's coming to get water for her family, and she runs into the living water, leaning up against the well. Jesus looks at her and says, woman, give me a drink. And I told you already about that, woman. Right? So I don't need to repeat that, I don't think. But he addresses her and says, come on, give me a drink. And in turn, she says, why are you even here? You don't even have a pitcher to send down there and even get water. And he looks at her and says, if you knew the gift of God that was standing in front of you, you would have asked me for water to drink, and I would have given you living water. Water that would quench your thirst for the rest of your life. But the most powerful part to me was when she started talking about who they worship. And he looks at her and he says, again, woman, your people worship something they don't even know. How many times in our own personal lives do we worship and don't even know him? Right? So then he says, they that worship must worship in spirit. Anybody remember what in spirit means? From the inner self. Spirit worship means it's what's in your heart. So if you are filling your heart full of things that are ungodly, then what is really going to come out of you? It's not going to be real worship. It's going to be garbage. They say garbage in, garbage out. Whatsoever a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Right? So what you think of yourself actually matters. Because if it's surface deep, then it doesn't really count a whole lot. But when it's heart deep, it actually turns you into what you call yourself. So some of us need to learn to call ourselves sons and daughters of a king. Some of us need to learn to call ourselves worshipers, because we need to become true worshipers. So worship in spirit means to worship from the heart. What about in truth? What does that mean? Nobody? How about not blinded by self-imposed or obligated worship? Are you obligated to worship?
No.
Why? Nobody? Yes? Because it's a choice. Very good. Your worship towards God is a choice. It's not an obligation. They that worship must worship in spirit and in truth. It's not truth if it's obligated. If I tell you, when Daniel comes later to lead us in worship, if I tell you, get up on your feet and I want you to worship lift your hands and I want you to worship God, I need you to do this right now, then I have then made you feel obligated to stand up and lift your hands. What does it mean when you lift your hands? Surrender. Right? Cop says, stick them up. What do? You surrender, right? I don't know about you, but I don't want to be tased or nothing like that. So my hands are going straight up. So what happens is this, is that when we lift our hands, it is an act of surrender on our part to Him, to honor Him and to adore Him in worship. So if I command you to lift your hands, then you are doing it out of obligation and not out of something that's in your heart to do. So then it doesn't become true worship. Right? So, good stuff. You guys good? I feel like y'all just staring at me now. It's weird. All right. Here we go. I'll read this to you. The last thing on my notes for last week. We have made worship about music when in reality it's all about a surrendered life. Worship is about your life being surrendered to God. It's not about you singing a song. It's about you laying down your life on His altar every day and saying, God, do with me as you will. Use me how you want. It's about getting up in the morning and instead of looking at your Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram, you instantly go to Him. You spend time with Him. You get into His presence. All right, you guys ready for part 2? Yeah. All right. I got some cool insight I want to share with you. We're going to be reading out of Matthew chapter 14. We'll start there, and then we're going to go somewhere else. Matthew chapter 14, starting with verse 22. They'll have it on the screen for you, and you can read it along with me. Immediately, He directed the disciples to get into the boat and go ahead of Him to the other side of the Sea of Galilee while He sent the crowds away. After He had dismissed the crowds, He went up on the mountain by Himself to pray. Hang on right there. Prayer. What is prayer? I'm going to blow your mind. Go ahead. A way to talk to God. Yeah, that's good. Anybody else, real quick? Yeah.
Connection.
Okay, connection.
Being in the place where it's only Him.
Yeah, alone with Him. It's good, yes. Place to get what? Counsel? Oh, I could have sworn she said counsel. Counsel and answers, whatever. Yes?
I'm cheating a little bit. Can I read this?
Yeah, go.
From Webster. But it says, prayer.
Yep.
And I won't read it all.
Okay.
But it says, in worship. Now this is in Webster's. You can look it up.
Yeah.
A solemn address to the Supreme Being consisting of adoration.
So good.
Or
So
an
good.
expression of our sense of God's glorious perfections.
So good.
Supplication for on and on and on. But consists of adoration.
So good. I love that. Hang on, buddy. I love that. That's powerful because my point was this. Prayer is a form of worship. Prayer is a form of worship. And most of the time we think of prayer as us just going and talking to God. Right? But when we choose to have communication with Him, we are putting Him as number one. Right? And we have then a singular focus. Worship is not about many things sitting in front of you. It's about operating and worshiping one thing and having a singular focus in your life. It's powerful. So good. So Jesus goes up to pray. Why? Because he made sure that his Father was the one in singular focus with him. He was trying to show us something. He was showing his disciples that you cannot function outside of true worship. Notice I didn't say prayer. I said true worship. True worship is going to him and talking to him and honoring him. Think about this. The disciples are sitting around on the mountain with Jesus, and instead of asking the crazy questions they could have asked, they said, teach us to pray.
Yeah.
How does he start it? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. You know what that is? Worship. It is honoring his name. He's teaching them that the very first thing you begin with is worship, because prayer is a form of worship. So good. It is a form of worship. So we'll go ahead and go on. When it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was already a long distance from the land, tossed and battered by the waves, for the wind was against them. Go ahead. And in the fourth watch of the night, around 3 to 6 a.m., Jesus came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, it is a ghost, and they cried out in fear. Stay right there. Go back to that. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. Real worship brings pure vision. Real worship brings pure vision. It means you can see beyond the storm of what's standing on the other side of it. So, you guys good with this? Watch. Let me bring it down to where you guys are. You're going through something at school. Maybe people are making fun of you. Maybe people are treating you bad. Maybe you're just having a rough week and you're not getting along with anybody and things are just falling apart around you, right? Real worship doesn't focus on the struggle. It focuses on what's on the other side of the wind and waves.
Yep.
It sees something with clear vision. When we have pure worship, when we have true worship, when we have spirit worship in our life, we can see beyond the storm and still gaze upon the beauty of his fiery eyes. And that very thing pulls us through. What I'm teaching you is real. And this is going to help you get through. Okay? They cried out of fear, because when we live in fear, it's because we don't have an understanding of real worship. We don't have an understanding of who we are worshiping. Look at me, all of you. We worship God. The only God. The one true God. The great I am. The El Shaddai. These are all his names. Right? He's so powerful that he spoke the world into existence. He's so powerful that he kneels down and crafts man out of the dust of the ground with his very own hands. He's so powerful that in an earlier chapter, Jesus is laying in the bottom of the boat asleep, and the wind and the waves are crashing up against the boat, and the disciples are up on top, terrified and freaking out. We're going to drown, we're going to die. And Jesus is asleep in the middle of what's going on. Why? Because he knew he was going to walk on that very thing later.
Yeah.
Right? So they go wake up Jesus. He comes up and he just says, peace be still. Why? Because he created all that. He knew how to shut it down. If he knows how to do all of that, then why do we operate out of fear? The reason we operate out of fear is because we don't have clear vision, because our heart's not in the right place of true worship. That's wrong.
Yes.
That's very wrong. And it's hard to hear that sometimes, because We think just because we lift our hands and just because we have tears streaming down our face that we're living in real worship. But the second we walk out of that door after being in a corporate setting, the fear grabs a hold of us again, and we start putting on Facebook, man, my anxiety is up tonight. Anxiety is driven by fear. Fear has no room in your life if you're a true worshiper.
That's true.
It has no room. Because a true worshiper doesn't operate out of fear. Fear is the opposite of faith. They that worship must worship him in spirit and in truth. And the just shall live by faith. Right? Does it say, and the just shall live by fear? No. Fear has no room in your life as a believer. None. When you're walking down the hallways of your school, look up at me real quick. When you're walking down the hallways of your school, you should not walk down the hallway of your school operating in fear. You should be walking down the hallway of your school operating in faith and in true worship. Yeah. Because when you operate that way, people see something different on you. And then therefore it demands the earth to respond to what you carry. Right. I don't know why I'm on that. That is powerful to me. The earth is groaning for the sons of God to be revealed. Who is he talking about? You. Yep. Me. When we become true worshipers and when we carry him, the earth is getting what it's been groaning for. How many of you can think of somebody right now that you walked by in the hallway of your school sometime this week that you know needs Jesus Christ in their life? Raise your hand. My question to you is this: what'd you do about it? Seriously, what'd you do about it? Your worship, your true heart worship, your adoration to God, your oneness, your focus should allow you to carry him to such a degree that it demands a response from them. But when it demands a response from them, and they respond to us and what we carry, then it in turn demands a response from us to respond back to them with the gospel. What is the gospel? My testimony of what Christ did in me. How is the world ever going to have hope if we only contain hope inside of us and never release it? You guys hear me? All right. Keep going. But immediately he spoke to them, saying, take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid. Go ahead. Peter replied to him, Lord, if it's really you, command me to come to you on the water. He said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw, here we go again, we're back to that place. The first time they saw Jesus walking on the water, and they were terrified because they thought they were looking at a ghost. Once they recognized it was Jesus, Peter cries out and says, Lord, if it's really you, ask me to come. Jesus' response is so cool. He says, come. He don't get into some philosophical weird thing. He just says, come on. Peter gets out and begins to walk on the water, but then he saw something. He saw the effects of the wind. What's funny to me about that is that Jesus is the creator of the wind. Right? So, Peter was only seeing the effects of something Jesus allowed to test his faith. He's out on the water, he sees the wind, the effects of it, and all of a sudden he was frightened. He goes back to fear. Sometimes we don't succeed in life because we're not willing to jump out of the boat. We want to stay in. That's awesome. We want to stay in the boat. We want to stay right there because we want to stay in a comfort place, a comfort zone. Well, let me tell you something about comfort. Comfort doesn't come by you staying in a boat. Comfort comes when the Comforter himself invades your life, and that Comforter is the Holy Spirit.
So good.
We talk about comfort zones all the time. There's no such thing as a comfort zone. He is comfort. And if we operate in him, then we will always stay comfortable and we will never operate in fear. And I'm not talking about comfortable in the natural. I'm talking about comfortable in the way we live in the spirit realm. Right? Is everybody getting this? Look at me. Tell me, are you getting it? You understand where I'm coming from? What I'm trying to do is help you go to a place where you no longer operate in your school out of fear anymore. You're going in to take a test. Can I tell you something crazy? So I'm going back to college to get my bachelor's degree. Well, I haven't been in school in years. So they told me, they said, man, you got to take a test. Huh? I had to take a test that would show them where I needed to start because I haven't been in school for so long. I was terrified. Can I be real? I was terrified. Like, I almost canceled my test last night and moved it to sometime this weekend because I was freaking out a little bit. I was like, man, I don't want to go in there and sit and do this because it's online and I can't be on campus. They took over my computer. They were watching me through my camera and just to make sure I wasn't cheating. And the whole time, I'm sitting there moving around because, dude, listen, they never diagnosed us with ADD back in the day, but I'm sure I had it. So anyway, so I'm sitting there bouncing around in my seat, my legs killing me, man, and I'm like, okay, I got to get this test done. So I'm reading and I'm moving all over the place. I bet they were on the other end of that camera rolling. They're like, my God, this dude, I'm glad he's not coming to class. He'd drive me crazy. So anyway, I'm doing this test and I'm freaking out. I am freaking out. Because I'm like, my God, if I don't pass this test, and it's not even about passing it. It's actually just a placement test to see where I need to be placed. And so I'm freaking out about it. I end up doing it, and I walk out, and I'm like, man, that wasn't so bad, other than the math. So I looked at things on that math, and I'm like, no. No.
This ain't even real.
I'm like, what is that? Okay, C. Whatever. We're going. Anyway, so, listen, hey, I gave it my best shot. An educated guess. I had like a 25% chance. So, listen, no, it wasn't 50. Anyway, listen, so I get all that done, and I realized something. I began to revert back to a place of fear instead of faith.
That's good.
I know God wants me to go back to school and work on my bachelor's for ministry. I know that. So why did I begin to function and operate in fear over something He's asked me to do? Why do we revert back to the normalcy of what we've lived in for a long time when God challenges us to do something and step out? Peter, he said, Peter, I need you to get out that boat. Come on, that's why he said, come. If you don't want to get out the boat, don't ask him because he's going to tell you to come. Right? And then you get out that boat, next thing you know, you're so distracted by the effects of the wind that you take your eyes off the singular focus you were supposed to be on that would have walked you all the way to presence.
So good.
It would have walked you all the way to presence. Because Jesus was just standing out there in the middle just waiting for him to get all the way to him so he could embrace him. Sometimes we miss the embrace of God because we lose our focus and start looking at our circumstances rather than keeping our eyes focused on His eyes.
So good.
His eyes will always guide you to where you need to be. Watch. When we stay focused on His eyes, it becomes true worship inside of us because nothing else can entertain us. Why do you think the woman caught in adultery when she caught a glimpse of His eyes never sinned again? Right? Man, I'm telling you, if I could run right now, I'd run. So listen, why do you think the woman at the well, when she caught the gaze of His eyes, she went back to the city she was from and began to talk to the men of the city? He will always take you back to the things you were burdened with and broken with to redeem them when you've been redeemed by the gaze of His eyes. phenomenal, I'm telling you. Wow. You guys get it?
Say that again.
Redeemed. I love that. I can't because I don't remember what I said. You have to watch the video. So, I love you, man. All right, go on to the next one. Immediately, Jesus extended his hand and caught him, saying to him, "O you of little what?
Hey.
Why did you doubt? Why did you ask me to bring you out on something that you were always intended to walk on because of my authority, and then you got captured
That's good.
by something else?" You got captured by something else. See, storms were never meant for us to go through. It was meant for us to walk on.
So good.
Does that help anybody? It helps me. I was never meant to be captured in the middle of a storm. I was meant to be captured by the gaze of his eyes so that I could walk on the storm.
So good.
I need to walk on. Jesus extends his hand down into the very thing he created that he intended for himself and all of his people to walk on. And he pulls him back up out of it. And he walks back to the boat with Peter. Why? Because once again, even though we fall, when we refocus and we begin to look at him again, he pulls us out and begins to walk on the storm with us again. It's good. We struggle in storms because we're not focused on the right thing. We're focused on the voices coming out of the boat and saying you shouldn't have got out. Right? How many have a dream in here? A dream to do something great for God. I need you to hear me and hear me well. The dream will never be discovered or conquered in the boat. It will only be conquered and won on the thing you were intended to walk on top of. Seriously. It will only be conquered and won when you live on top of the thing you were intended to walk. And that is singular focus in the eyes of Jesus. Have you ever wondered why some people just they got hell going on in their life, but it seems like they just walk in this peace and you're like, dude, I'd be flipped upside down right now. They understand something. His eyes penetrate through the storm. And if I stay focused on them eyes, then I never get distracted by anything else, and I can just walk to him and be embraced on the other side. Whew. I got to get to this because this is deep. We got what, 2 more? Go ahead. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those in the boat worshiped him. Why do we have to wait until he gets in the boat to worship him? Why can't we worship him on top of the storm? Look, with awe-inspired reverence, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Their vision did not come into operation until they saw the miracle. Sometimes it takes people to see a miracle before their faith can be built up and begin to operate where they're intended to operate. But the church should never have to operate off of seeing a miracle before they believe.
Amen.
We walk by faith and not by
Sight.
He walked by sight for a moment. That's why he sunk. Most Christians that fall away from God is because they walk by sight and not by faith. Well, if God doesn't do this for me, then if God doesn't bring me through this, then well, see, then your heart's not in true worship. This is what I'm trying to teach you. Real worship goes above the storm and sees what they're supposed to see. Go to John chapter 6 for me. Now I'm going to read this story to you again from the perspective of John. John is like my favorite disciple because he don't go into all the detail like Matthew did. He just flat out gives it something. Watch this. You guys good? I got a little bit of time, and then I'm going to have Danny Boy come up here, and we're going to get into some worship. Because I think some of you are going through something right now that you need to get on top of.
It's truth.
Right? Especially my son in the front row. Some of you need to get to a place where you begin to worship in spirit and in truth, and not out of, oh, I need him real quick. right? He's not a get out of jail free card. Then Jesus, knowing that they were going to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountainside by himself. Once again, he understands the importance of going and spending one-on-one worship time with the Father. Go ahead. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea. I love the way John describes this. And they got into the boat and started to cross the sea to Capernaum. It was already dark, and Jesus had still not come back to them. The sea was getting rough and rising high because of the strong wind was blowing. Then, when they had rowed 3 or 4 miles and were near the center of the sea. Now, I need you to get this, because I'm about to reveal something to you that is going to jack with you, because it jacked with me. When they had rowed 3 or 4 miles and were near the center of the sea, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and approaching the boat, and they were terribly afraid. Go ahead. But Jesus said to them, "It is I am. Do not be afraid." Isn't it funny that in order for Israel to escape the attack of Egypt, the I Am had to part the very thing he created so that they could walk on it?
It's so good.
They walked on dry ground. He parted the very thing that was the obstacle that was in their way, because the I Am showed up in the middle of our moment of being afraid.
Oh, man.
Egypt is trailing us. They're coming to kill us. God, what are you going to do about it? Moses, take your staff and slam it in that water and watch what I'm getting ready to do. And he obeys the voice of God, slams that staff in the water, and all of a sudden that sea separates. Now the ground would be muddy, but his wind is so powerful that it dried up the very thing that had been muddy for years because of the water. He dried up that very thing so that they could cross over and escape the attack of the enemy. If he can do that, how much easier is it for him to walk on that very thing? He says, I am. Do not be afraid. Go ahead. Then they were willing to take him on board the boat. See, he doesn't even talk about Peter. He skips by this because he's not focused on that thing. He says, I need you to focus on the purpose of what I'm talking about. The purpose of what I'm talking about is this, is that true worshipers invite him into the boat. They bring him in. I don't just want you to be the Lord of the thing I'm supposed to walk on. I even want you to be the Lord of the vessel that carries me from place to place.
Yeah.
I want you to be the Lord of the thing that I live in.
So good.
I want you to be the Lord of the thing that I travel in. Watch. Then they were willing to take him on the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore of the land to which they were going.
Yep.
Worship, real worship, will take you and everyone with you to the shore of the next dimension in an instant when he shows up on the boat. Because watch, I told you, this flipped me out. Let's go back a couple verses. Go back to the one where it talks, yeah, right there. Then, when they had rowed 3 or 4 miles and were near the center of the sea, they saw Jesus walking. They saw him, which means that they had stopped in the center and now he is walking to them. Go back to that verse. Then they were willing to take him on board the boat, and immediately their worship of invitation to the one they were worshiping immediately propelled them to their destination. The reason we don't reach our destination sometime is because we're too busy worshiping the storm rather than the one that can get us through the storm. We are focused on the wrong thing. How many going through a struggle this week? Be real. Now my question to you, there's a lot of hands that just went up. My question to you is this. Why are you allowing that storm that you're in to dictate where you live? What do I mean? You are allowing that storm in your life right now to keep you in the center of something you were supposed to be walking on. And if you would just change your focus and begin to worship Him instead of your struggle, you would be propelled to the next dimension that's waiting on you on the other side. So good. So good. That's verse 21. Immediately, maybe things would happen faster for us if we just lived a lifestyle of worship. Because then He would be with us everywhere we went.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
You know, we talk about the suddenlies, and suddenly there came a sound. Right? I love that. I get my black preacher voice, man, when I start talking stuff like that. And then, let's say, I'll play. I'm not going to go there. They talk about suddenly He showed up. Suddenly He appeared in the room. Suddenly there came a sound from heaven as a mighty rushing. Say it. Mighty rushing.
Mighty rushing.
Mighty rushing. Wind.
Mighty rushing.
Say wind. Come on, say wind.
Wind.
You guys help me out here. A
Wind.
mighty rushing.
Wind.
Wait a minute. What was Peter focusing on the sea?
The appearance.
The wrong wind.
Yeah.
The wrong wind. You're focusing on the wind of distraction rather than the wind of His presence. Because the wind of His presence will always lead you in the right place at the right time. That's why when you read the book of Acts, you see the apostles and all the disciples doing powerful things and being led by the Spirit because they understood what wind they were being directed by because they had a singular focus.
So good.
I'm telling you, I started looking at this, man, and God just started giving me a different perspective of what worship really looks like. Worship is your ability to get out of yourself, meaning the boat, and begin to walk upon the very thing that's trying to distract you because you are focused on the prize that's at the end. And that prize is Jesus. That prize is Him. I know my leg hurts right now. I know I'm going through a struggle right now. But I choose to stay focused on the one that is going to lead me right to His presence. And when I get there, He will embrace me. And every struggle, every fear, every pain, every sickness will just have to fall right off of me because His presence destroys it all. The Bible says that the mountains melt like wax at the presence of the Lord. What mountain is in your life right now that you just need an embrace from Him? And when you embrace Him, it just melts like wax off of you. And you come out on a plain surface, walking normal again. Normal meaning in His presence. Our normal is walking up hills and valleys and trying to get to a destination when He just wants to make it a level playing field so you can just walk to where you need to be. Woo! Mercy. Come on, Danny. I feel like I could talk about this for a few weeks, man. Look at me, right here. Worship is not about you. Worship is about Him. Where you play the role is laying down your life and saying, it's no longer I that live, but Christ that lives within me. When people look into your eyes, do they see hope or do they see struggle? Don't focus on Him. One day, seriously, one day we're going to kill all the lights. And you never know, I might put Daniel in that back green room. And he'll lead worship from back there. Because too many times when we have somebody as gifted as him come up here, he is so gifted. He's so anointed. But if all we ever do is elevate him, then we're elevating the wrong person. That's why I don't like when we have bands up here all the time, and then I look out at the crowd, and all I see people doing is staring at the band, and there's no engagement in the presence of God whatsoever. You will never learn to walk on the very thing that you struggle with until you learn to operate in true worship. You have to learn to operate in true worship. Peter got a glimpse of what his future looked like that day. He got out of that boat and began to walk on the very thing for a moment. And then he took his eyes off, and that reminded him in the future that I could never take my eyes off of him. I got to stay singular focused, and when I do, it is going to put me right where I need to be. If the steps of a righteous man, are you righteous? You are? Means you're right with God and right standing, doing the right thing, living the right way. If the footsteps of a righteous man are ordered of the Lord, if they're ordered by him, but yet we don't live in a lifestyle of worship, do we ever attain the steps? We don't. You know why? Because we go off on our own path.
So good.
We go off. He has predestined. I know people get freaked out when I talk about this, but he has predestined a path for you. And I need you to look at me. Your predestined path is not hell.
That's right.
Your predestined path is to bring the kingdom to earth and see the presence of God invade the earth, and then one day go home to be with him. But if you choose to go off that path and live life the way you want, then you have pushed your destiny to a place you don't want to go.
So good.
Y'all understand? How many of you in this room are like Peter, that for a minute you were doing good, but then you took your eyes off of him and now you feel like you're drowning? Yeah. It's a struggle. I understand it. I do. I understand it. Because sometimes I go through things and I'm like, God, where are you in this? Where are you in this moment? And then I got to look outside myself, outside my own boat, and see that he's walking on the very thing that I'm going through. And he's just invited me to come. He's just invited me to come and be with him so that he can set me free from it. I'm telling you what, man, I feel the presence of God right now. As he worships, notice I said as he worships, because I already know where he's going. He's going to worship whether you do or not. I just want you to sit and ponder what was said tonight. And if you feel like you need to respond in a certain way, then you respond. Remember, I told you you're not obligated to do anything. I'm not going to force you to do anything. If you want to go to the altar, you go to the altar. Not because I said it, but because your heart is driving you to go there. If you want to stand up and worship, then you stand up and worship because that's where your heart is. But I just want you to understand something. God doesn't want you to live in this place of struggle anymore. He wants you to live in a place of true worship so that you soar high above the storm with him. All right? Go ahead.